Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Pop the Red Pill, a podcast about truth and all things parental alienation. We are here to lift the veil. My name is Kim McCord, and this is my co-host, Karen Belcourt. This is part 2 of our 4-part series on domestic violence. Our topic today is post-separation legal abuse. When the relationship ends and the abuse does not stop, it just transitions to a new form of abuse called post-separation legal abuse.
Domestic violence is more than just physical abuse. During the relationship, domestic violence can be coercive control, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse.
Domestic abusers often exert their control on the ex-partner through the legal system.
Post-separation legal abuse takes a tremendous psychological toll on victim survivors, and especially on the children.
The legal system often mistakes legal abuse for high conflict divorce. When abusers use the courts to harass their ex-partners, judges wrongly consider the couple both contributing to the conflict. They fail to identify the legal maneuvers these master manipulators spin as a form of continued abuse on their ex-partners.
Known for unleashing superhero survivors of abuse,
our guest uses trauma-informed, survivor-centered advocacy while equipping communities for effective response to family violence.
Please welcome Kathy Jones of Mother Justice Network. Welcome, Kathy.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us today.
Great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
When women finally have the courage to leave these abusive relationships, they will often minimize the damage done to both themselves and their children. Kathy, do you hear women coming out of these relationships saying things like, even though he abused me, he was a good father?
Actually, that's the most common thing that I hear from protective mothers, especially initially early on in the separation process. In fact, I would say the vast majority of the mothers that I work with say early on, I want him to have regular and continued access to the kids because just because he hurts me doesn't mean that he's going to hurt the kids. Statistically, of course, we know that that's not true, that in fact abusers are much more likely than non-abusive parties to have ongoing or to perpetrate ongoing abuse on the children. But it's really hard to say that out loud to somebody who doesn't want to hear it. And so often these mothers really have to have their own personal experiences about what the kids are going to start going through. And I've learned to just give them a heads up to like, here are some red flags that you should be looking for.
Kathy, I think that it's probably, if you would agree with this, an oxymoron. On one hand, he abused me, and on the other hand, but he's a good father. Those two things do not go together. If the mother of the children is being abused, you are not a good parent. That is not a good father, period.
Sorry, excuse me, my phone just went off. I 100% agree with that. You cannot be a good, a decent, a kind, or a healthy kind of parent and be abusing the children's other parent. It's just not possible. Even if the abuse happens outside the context of the physical presence of the children will still see the ongoing impact that the abuse has had on the victimized parent, whether it's the ongoing depression or anxiety or hypervigilance, whether it's the long-term effects of like actual injuries being done. One of the victims of abuse that we don't really talk about a whole lot are the animals who are abused in these homes. Often, I think statistically, the National SPCA put out statistics at one point that suggested that 85-ish% of animals where in homes where there's a domestic violence perpetrator are also being abused. 85%, that's quite a lot. And I would tell you that in just a few years of working at my local domestic violence crisis center, we often encouraged women to leave with the animals because at one point there was a rash of animals being killed after the women went into shelter. So yeah, I'm sorry, I went off on the tangent there, but it's very common, like, no, you can't be a good parent and abuse the children's other parent. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
Kathy, do you know what the statistics are for abusers abusing the children? If they're abusing their partner, you know, do you know what the statistics are around being like abusive towards the children?
Yeah. The best statistics that I have seen have indicated that up to 60% of children in the home are also being physically abused, and up to a third of the children in the home are being sexually abused.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Once you leave, once the healthy-minded / survivor victim partner leaves, whether it be the mother or the father, we're talking kind of more about mothers today, all that abuse that has been bestowed upon you is now getting bestowed upon your children and your
That's
animals.
right. Yeah. Because the abuser always has to have a victim, always has to have that person that they maintain total and complete control over. And so children are often viewed as the replacement victim until they can find another adult who will do all the caretaking, who will read that perpetrator's mind to anticipate everything that they could possibly need or want, who will take care of them sexually and physically and do their laundry and do the housekeeping. In fact, it's very common for the children, even as young as 3 and 4 years old, to have to take on caretaking responsibilities of the perpetrator once the adult victim has left the home. So like I, for instance, was in court with a perpetrator who was bragging about the fact that his 6-year-old could cook and clean as well as his ex-wife ever did, who would talk about how a 6-year-old could make pasta from scratch. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know about you ladies, but I don't know any 6-year-old who knows how to do handmade pasta from scratch. And the fact that this guy could brag about this told me that that poor little girl was getting beaten quite regularly in order to be able to develop those skills. So
That's
yeah,
a good point. The role reversal is, I guess, what happens to these kids. Instead
and the unreasonable
of the parent taking care of the child ends up taking care of the parent.
Right. And they have completely unreasonable expectations of what children should behave like in the context of being a child. Like they have no idea about what normal like milestones look like for children. And I think I've mentioned this in an earlier podcast. Children are expected to take care of the abuser. And so much so that the abusers really make holidays and any kind of event that focuses on anybody other than himself, they will make those events just miserable for the family. And that's a really common tactic.
Yeah. Just like they did when we were in the home.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's a great answer, Kathy. And just one last little thing about the pets. That's such a good point because we never really talked about that. But I know my little dog, when I brought my little dog to my new home after I left, we had a groomer that used to come. It was really cool. It was like a mobile groomer. And the groomer came here to my new home and took my little dog Bella and did the grooming. And when she brought dog back, this was the first time that she'd done the grooming at my new home, she looked at me, she goes, "Oh my God." She said, "This is like a completely different dog." She said, "When I did the grooming at the other house, this dog was so skitterish. If I dropped my scissors, she would jump out of her skin. She's so much more calm. She's rolling over on her back and letting me scratch her tummy." She said, "It's notable."
Wow.
Yeah, dogs and kids know.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And unfortunately, our countries are similar in this, that they are far more likely to care about the abuse and neglect of an animal than they are about the children involved.
Absolutely.
Especially in cases of domestic violence. And it's one of the reasons why I say in general that child protection is a misnomer. They're really more useless than tits on a bull. Excuse my language.
I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kathy, these legal separation abuse cases, they are usually marked by one high conflict litigant, often personality disordered, who exerts power by dragging their ex back to court over and over again, making the divorce or custody resolution basically unresolvable.
Yes.
Can you tell us about what are some of the kind of the most outlandish ones that you have seen? I mean, I know there's many, but I think that
Just
they
too
have
many.
a playbook, right? There's a bit of a playbook, but there's
Yeah.
a couple that are kind of reoccurring.
Yeah.
Is there any that kind of stick out in your mind?
Like, yes, like just so many. But I could always go into a courthouse and just see which ones are domestic violence related just by the thickness of the file that's sitting on the court shelves. So like in one of the worst cases that I had, there was literally 10 court files, like an entire shelf devoted to this one particular family. And the man, I use that term loosely in this case, had filed over 1,200 motions in a period of like 7 years. Like he was in the court constantly, just about every other day, filing motion against this mom. And that's really kind of part of the MO, is to just drown the victim in just like all these constant and baseless accusations that the victim parent has to respond to constantly, and it becomes overwhelming and anxiety producing and depressing. And it starts kind of generating those behaviors that the victim parent starts being accused of being hysterical and obstinate and like insert adjective here, that people start saying, well, she must be the crazy one because he wouldn't say this if it weren't true, and but the litigation goes on and on forever. And usually the litigation starts like even with the separation and divorce, things don't get really rolling until either the woman requests, or the primary caretaker of the children actually requests more money for child support, or until the perpetrator of abuse starts requesting that their child support obligation gets reduced. And even if they were in agreement beforehand about what the child schedule, the parenting schedule would look like, once that request for child support change occurs, then all of a sudden you'll see language where the predator is either looking for 50-50 custody, exactly 50-50 custody, or they're looking for primary custody because they believe that the 50-50 or the primary means that they'll either have to stop paying support, or that they'll be allowed to stop paying support, or that the adult victim will have to pay them for it. And, for the privilege of having any time with their children. And of course, that's what happens over and over and over again. The vast majority of my cases now are cases where the mother has actually already lost custody of the children, or is well on their way, like just a few court dates from losing their children. And it happens more often than a decent person can change their underwear. It's really a crisis. It's a crisis level. But a very thick family court file is really one of the first things that I look for. The second thing I look for being who filed for child support and at what point. Another thing that I look for is what I call the magic defense of she's a bitter, violent, lying, lazy, crazy, drunken, drug-abusing, groping slut. If you start looking through the filings in the court, you'll see that all of these accusations come from the primarily abusive party. And there may be no actual proof in the family court file about these accusations, but because the primarily abusive parent party has used those words, the court, it's like, they're like, oh, really? You're saying that? You would never say that if it weren't true. And so the court starts buying into that bullshit. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I start looking for. But high conflict is a misnomer. It is, I have not yet seen a high conflict case that wasn't domestic violence involved. I'd be curious to find somebody who thought that they did have a case, but I haven't seen one yet.
Mm-hmm. So Kathy, that's a great point about, you know, them dragging you back to court over and over and over again. And just for our audience, there's some other terminology that they may know this by. Vexatious litigation, procedural abuse, or my favorite, judicial terrorism.
Yeah. Well, I find that the vexatious litigation or vexatious litigant term is thrown out there when it's actually the healthy parent that is standing up and fighting for their rights and the rights of their children. And they are actually right. And the court wants to stop them. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yes, I do. And I would actually encourage victimized parents to actually go through their case file and start documenting, in fact, who initiated what motions or who initiated what litigation, because you often see, like, when you can parse it out person for person, you can often see who in fact the vexatious litigator is by who is filing the most and who is filing specifically around monetary issues as opposed to child safety issues. I find, generally speaking, that the protective parent is far more likely to be filing around safety issues, and the abuser is far more likely to be filing around financial issues.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is really, like, I'm just sitting here thinking, that's absolutely the truth as far as I know it, and the stories that I hear. Absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
And I would even take that further to say, when you're going through your case file and parsing out who's filing what, then to also include and whose motions are primarily being granted or denied, because you will often see that women's motions are very regularly and routinely denied, and men's motions are very regularly and routinely granted. So that's definitely something that needs to be looked at in every case individually.
Yes. So Kathy, can you go into a little bit more depth on that, about why is that women's mothers are denied often
motions,
fathers not? Can you go into that a little bit?
So I think we need to remember as a whole that our legal system was created by a middle to upper class white heterosexual Christian men to protect property interests above everything else. That safety of the primary caretaking parent and children falls secondary to the right of protecting property. And because of that, the other thing to remember is that the concept of family is kind of an ancient concept, and family is, the word family actually comes from a word that means the totality of what a man owns. So in my evangelical Christian background, we were told, oh, that was such a wonderful thing that a man's family included the slaves, and that slaves had inheritance rights to the man's property. No, that's not what that meant. The concept of family meant that everybody who is not the man, the woman, the children, the slaves, everybody were the chattel, were the owned property of the man, and that man had the power of life and death over everybody below him. And so when we think about the concept of family courts now, it is absolutely the power of every man to have the consequence of life and death over the people in his family. That's why we have children being abused to the point of death. That's why we have women who are being hunted down and stalked and without consequence. We're seeing it in the papers every day, in the news every day, because the courts will always protect a man's right to access his property over and above the rights of everybody else to be safe.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I explained everything that you asked me to in that concept, but that's basically the brief rundown. And so our entire legal system really focuses on making sure that a man can access his property long before they will give that property the right to be safe.
Mhm. So the term in the best interest of the children is really just a cover up. They don't really care about it.
No. If they really cared about it, they would be, the best interest of the children would be what is safest for the children and what promotes that those children's well-being above everything else. And that's not what the courts do. The best interest of the child is really represented to be what will give that head of the house full and complete access to everybody in that family. That's what best interest of the child really means.
Right.
Wow, that's
Is
so.
it not known though that one of the best interests of the children is that they remain with their primary caregiver after the divorce? If there was a primary caregiver that stayed home with the children 24/7, that the children
that would be in the children's best interest.
remain with
Yes.
that primary caregiver. Right?
Yes.
If the primary caregiver was good enough to be the primary caregiver for 5, 10
Beforehand.
years, how all of a sudden, after the divorce happens, have they turned into a unfit, abusive, crazy person?
Right.
They
Right.
didn't.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Speaking of that, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Test, better known as the ACEs test, makes it clear that children witnessing their mother being abused in any way causes profuse harm to their health and well-being. So how does post-separation legal abuse affect the children, Kathy?
Oh, the children are devastated by it. And for so many reasons, but in fact, studies have shown that children who experience just, and I use that word in quotes, emotional abuse, actually have worse physical impact than if the children themselves were being physically abused directly. Okay. And so children experience emotional devastation, psychological devastation. They are impacted academically, socially, in every possible way it is that a child can be impacted. They are impacted by watching their primary caregiver being abused. And I just want to put a word out there. Dr. Jessica Taylor out of Great Britain, she is very cautious around the concept. Actually, I've heard her kind of denounce it altogether. And I still have yet to see the reasoning behind that. But so I just want you to be aware that there are some people who are cautious around that concept. But I would tell you that right now, it's very much a concept that I believe is important to the court's understanding that there is great impact to children when they are exposed. Some people call it domestic violence by proxy, but I call it children living domestic violence because I find that there is no proxy about it. The children are steeped in the domestic violence just as much as the adult victim is. It's just that the perpetrator uses different, not different, kind of the child version of the same tactics that they do on the adult victim. And so, for instance, if the abuser is financially abusing the adult victim by withholding child support or not paying their child support obligations or by not paying like ordered payments, that kind of thing, they'll abuse the child by saying something along the lines of, well, I can't get you the food that you need because your mother takes all my money. And so I can't, like, you have to get your food from her. Make sure she brings make sure she provides you with snacks to come back home because I don't have money to buy you food. Another very common tactic is where the abuser will get all the clothes, like the adult victim will send the children with clothes back to the perpetrator's house, and the perpetrator will confiscate all the clothes and not send the clothes back. That's a hugely common thing. And so the victim has to constantly go out and buy more clothes because he's not sending the clothes. In fact, I have a survivor who says that her child has actually gone under the guy's bed and has taken pictures of all the clothing that the victim has seen, or that the children have seen, that the abuser father in this case has confiscated from the children. And that includes like electronics and like school computers and whatever else. It's like it's devastating to kids. They are in a constant state of anxiety and hypervigilance and all of that too. They have difficulty sleeping, and often they go to school the next day, they're tired, they're wiped out, they don't, often these children will go to school neglected with their hygiene and things of that. Like, I have abusers who don't take their kids to the dentist, or don't make sure that their kids' teeth are brushed, or even that their hair is brushed. That if the kids don't know to take care of themselves, and that's one of the first things I tell moms, is that you need to teach your kids early on how to care for themselves, how to brush their teeth, how to brush their hair, how to give them their own medications, because the abuser is not going to do that.
Right. Well, further to that, we do know from studies that 70% of children who are part of an alienating behaviors, they will end up with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and or suicide. It's very large. 50% end up being alienated from their own children if they don't end up being the alienator themselves, and 35% end up addicted to drugs, alcohol, or some other sort of addictive behavior.
And right now, fully 67% of all the mothers that I work with have at least one child who has expressed a wish to die. And like, you don't see that in any other generic population. It is just in this population, the battered, the battered victim parent, that 67% have at least one child who is expressing a wish to die. It's really, really devastating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and we have a person, you probably read the book. This was in the early 2000s, Pamela Richardson. She was from Vancouver, and she was married to a criminal lawyer. She had one little boy, and at the age of 4, she left the father. She left him, which is always very challenging. Anyway, that little boy, over the time, she had about 11 different lawyers, and she kept fighting to try and get access. And of course, he knew the court system. He knew all the tricks of the trade. She would go over, they did have shared custody, but she would go over to pick up the child, wouldn't be there. The child would be hiding quietly in the closet where the father told him to hide. And by the time the kid was 16, he was such a mess. He basically took himself and threw himself off the bridge and killed himself at 16. These kids, they you know what? They have nowhere to go, because the person that they're with, the so-called custodial parent, is usually the abusive parent. So they don't have any real connection with that person. They have an enmeshed relationship, but that does not mean
it's not a connection. It's not a healthy connection at all.
And so they don't have that parent, and then they keep being told that they don't have the other parent, the actual protective parent, who they're not seeing. So they don't feel like they have anybody. So it's understandable that the suicides are as high as they are, and the suicidal ideation.
It's really devastating. And what's most horrific is the way that I constantly see that these abusers will actually destroy their children's hope for a future by messing with their ability to engage in academics of any kind, by messing with their ability to engage in sports or in team events. The ways that they mess with their kids are as varied as their imagination, and the courts will continuously allow them to deny their children these necessities or these opportunities. Again, one of the most common things that I see is, especially if the protective parent has been ordered into the marital home, or been ordered to have the marital home, the abuser and the abuser has been ordered to pay the mortgage, they will stop paying the mortgage. They'll cut off their nose to spite their own face, as long as it means that she doesn't get what belongs to him. And like I see time and time again, the women and the children becoming homeless, actually living out of their own vehicles, because the courts won't move quickly to preserve their own court orders. And I think that that's one of the biggest frustrating things about family courts, is that even when they do make court orders that benefit the protective parent, they never enforce them. And so, like, I'm right around 4,000 families now. I can think of maybe 5 women that I've worked with who have gotten their child support on time without having to beg or prostitute themselves for it. Maybe 5 out of 4,000. That is not good odds. It's disgusting. And the fact that the courts will do anything other, because again, this is about preserving a man's right to access his property. His home is his property, his cash is his property, his children and even the ex-wife are his property. So the courts will preserve that before they will preserve the woman's right to be able to maintain residency in the home, even if they put it in their own orders. It's just mind-boggling.
Kathy, I know the number for the UK is only 1% of court orders are ever enforced. I don't know the number in the US or Canada, but do you have any idea about what that might be? I mean, you said almost never, or, you know.
I don't think I've ever seen a statistic on that, but it's really disgusting, the lack of enforcement. And of course, the police are no help on these issues, because the first thing they say is, this is a civil matter, you need to go to court to get enforcement. I thought you were freaking law enforcement. Like,
yeah.
The court's order is the law. Like, what don't you understand about that? And yeah, but police will not assist in that.
Yeah. And the judge denied me 3 times to have a police enforcement. Denied me 3 times, even though there were several arrests.
Yeah, I've personally only ever seen one man whose ass sat in jail for any length of time because he outright refused, told every judge he sat in front of, I will not pay child support. And finally, after I think this family was on judge number 7. And finally, the 7th judge said, oh, we'll enforce my orders, because if I don't enforce my orders, then the public is not going to have any faith in any order that I issue. And I'm like, wow, the judge finally gets that. Wow. One man out of 4,000 cases.
So the question that protective mothers keep asking themselves is, why does the court let the abuser continue with this post-separation legal abuse? And that's a simple answer: because they can.
Yep.
There's
money involved,
and they can keep the whole thing rolling. And yeah.
Yep. So, for every professional that jumps into this particular case, there's another opportunity for these professionals to shovel in money into their own coffers, whether it's the attorneys, the guardians ad litem, the mental health professionals, the evaluators, all of them. They can all come in and get their share of the dope. And it's a lucrative business. 50 billion plus in the United States, 6 billion plus in Canada. You know, who wouldn't want access to that pie? Yeah,
absolutely.
Heck, give me some. Give me 1% of that, and I will change the world.
No encouragement for them to change. That's why this is such an uphill battle.
That's right.
They don't want to stop the money tree from flowing.
Nope.
Karen?
Actually, so frequently the domestic abuser creates a false narrative that the other parent should lose much or all of their parenting time because they are mentally unstable. This ploy is a misogynistic, age-old fake.
Yep.
So, you spoke to it a little bit. Why do the judges continue to buy into it?
Well, because first of all, the courts are engaged in preserving a man's right to access his property above everything else. But secondly, our entire society has blinders on. We don't want to believe that abuse exists. We don't want to believe that sexual predation exists. We want to believe ultimately that the world that we live in is a good world. And so we're far more, all of us do it. We are far more likely, and of course, women, this is an age-old trope from the beginning of time. Women are hysterical. Women are, we exaggerate, and we gossip, and we lie. Since the dawn of Adam and Eve, like this is. Our unreliable qualities are listed there for all to see in like the basic books of religion, and so it's just these old tropes that we constantly are up against, and so it's far more palatable for judges to believe that we are the bitter, violent, lying, lazy, crazy, drunk, money grabbing slut than it is for them to think, hey, this man is really doing damage to his family. And that's another way that I kind of know that I'm talking to a victim is, have they been diagnosed with bipolar, or have they been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? Have they been diagnosed with anxiety or depression? I mean, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean domestic violence, but if they're calling me and they have those diagnoses, I'm like, oh yeah, you're a survivor, because nobody's calling an expert on domestic violence to talk about just straight mental health issues, right? So I'm constantly looking for those misdiagnoses. There are other ones too, but those are the ones that pop into my head. But bipolar is probably the most frequent accusation of predators and perpetrators. Munchausen by proxy is another common one.
Sorry, what is it?
Munchausen by proxy is another common accusation of predators, is that their adult victim has Munchausen by proxy.
Yeah.
What is that?
Munchausen by proxy is supposedly a condition that primarily women take their children for unnecessary medical treatment as a way of getting attention.
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
They make others and the child pretend to think that they are sick and ill.
Yes.
When they
Yes.
are.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's seriously messed up.
But I would say that more than 50% of the opposing parties that I work with accuse protective parents of Munchausen by proxy. And so for me, that is, anytime I hear that phrase, Munchausen by proxy, I say to myself, we need to rule out domestic violence first. Because it's far more likely to be domestic violence than it is to be an attention-seeking parent.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times the abusers are neglectful, like you said. And so if the healthy parent is actually attending to, which often they do, almost 100%, I'm sure, of the children's health and well-being, then, anything that they're grasping at, anything to make that the healthy parent sound like, they're causing problems or unstable or have healthy, unhealthy tendencies. So, yes.
Yep. And that's another, that's another marker that I look for in the case file when I'm just like kind of going in as not knowing either party. Is there domestic violence here? As I look for is one parent identifying that the children have significant medical issues, and is the other parent denying the existence of those medical issues. As soon as I see a parent denying that those children have issues, I'm like, oh, this is probably domestic violence.
Yeah,
because for whatever reason, I think it's tied to the whole concept of image. Those abusers need their family around them to be perfect. And so the idea that they're, and the irony, of course, is because of ACEs, right? The children are far more likely to have multiple diagnoses because being exposed to the abuse is going to make them physically sick. It's going to give them much more propensity for chronic life and health related issues, asthma, psychosomatic issues like stomach aches and inability to sleep, like all of this stuff like is going to be impacting the children. So it's far more likely than not. And in fact, the vast majority of the women that I work with have at least one child who has ADHD or ADD. And I know that that's not a coincidence. And so like so much of this chronic stuff, the life impacting stuff, and the abusers routinely deny there's anything wrong with their children, won't give their children medications, even for things like asthma, where the child could land in the hospital on death's door. They will not give the children the albuterol or whatever medications they need to prevent that from happening. And the courts let them do it,
Yeah.
which really pisses me off.
Well, that's a sign of the pathology. These types of abusers, the perfect family, so to speak, scenario is what they always spin. So nothing can be wrong with their children because they're perfect. So their children have to be perfect. You're the one that has all the problems, right? And let's just remind our viewers, 97% of all women who allege abuse are actually correct as far as being legitimate. So there's only 3% of women who are not telling the truth.
Right.
97% are.
And I want to ask our viewers that if you like the content of our podcast today, if you like what you're hearing, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. So, and that's it for Pop the Red Pill today, isn't it, Kim?
Yes, it
and
is.
Kathy, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to our part 3 of the 4-part series next week, which will be all about family court corruption. Have a great day. Thanks for viewing.
Thank you.